The Taiwanese Dharma friends, to them, I will be teaching the treatise, the essence of true eloquence. So I will give brief teachings on the teaching. And so I would like to greet everyone. The late Tenzin Changjin, who was the teacher of the Taiwanese disciples, but his legacy is still with us. So with regard to the teaching of the Buddha, in this world, amongst the many different religions, all of which has the main message of good heart. And so all of these religious traditions teach love and compassion. So in India, before the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, appeared over 3,000 years back, the practices of non-violence or non-harming, ahimsa and karuna, compassion, so these have been practiced in India. So this has spread, this kind of practice and the mental attitudes have spread in India. And Buddha Shakyamuni was also a practitioner of this tradition. But the difference is that these teachings of non-violence and compassion, so non-violence and the practice of ethical conduct and the motivation of compassion have been spread further extensively by the Jain practitioners. And then there have been many non-Buddhist traditions of India. So over 2,500 years ago, the Buddha, the Bhagwan Buddha, appeared in India. And he taught this practice of non-violence and the practice of compassion as the basis for his teaching. And then he taught, on the basis of these, the different philosophical ideas. So in India, there was Sankhya school of philosophy and so forth, and others which also believed in a theistic God, creator God. And accordingly, the followers are taught to practice according to the will of the God, and they practice the message. Whereas there were non-theistic religions of India, such as non-theistic Sankhya school, Buddhism, and Jainism. And so these schools do not talk about relying on a creator God, but the practice or the principle of law of causality. And the Buddha himself, after becoming enlightened, has said that I found this nectar-like teaching, nectar-like dharma, which is profound, peaceful, free from elaborations, and luminous and unconditioned. So how I interpret these lines is the first two words, profundity and peaceful, refers to the first teaching of the Buddha, and then the profundity here, the free from elaboration, refers to the teaching of emptiness in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, and then the unconditioned luminosity refers to the third teaching of the Buddha, which teaches the Buddha nature. So here the uncompounded or unconditioned doesn't refer to the things which are not brought about by causes and conditions. So it refers to this beginningless, luminous mind, the clear light mind, which of course is a conditioned or a compounded phenomena. So even if I were to teach this to others, nobody will understand me, and therefore I shall remain silent in the forest. So the Buddha said that. So this teaching, the profound teaching of selflessness, which the Buddha has gained realization into, would not be understood by others at that time, he said, and therefore he remained in the forest for 49 days without giving teachings. And then later, the Buddha started giving teachings, first to the 5 human disciples who were already familiar with the Buddha during the previous times in meditation. And so when they met the Buddha, they requested his teaching from him, saying that you must have gained special insights, profound and extraordinary insights and experiences. And therefore, the Buddha gave the teaching on the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths referring to the true suffering, true origin of suffering, true cessation of suffering, and true path. And so, to overcome the truth of suffering, the true suffering, the Buddha taught that suffering has its own cause, and causes and conditions, and therefore we must know what those causes and conditions are, and therefore he referred to them as the origin of suffering. So what is the use or help? How is it helpful to know that their suffering has its cause? And so the first cause amongst the 12 different links of dependent origination is ignorance. The first link in the 12 links is ignorance. So with regard to this, after the Buddha gave the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, many Indian learned have given thought to this, and one of the major institutions of learning in the old times was Nalanda. So many of the masters of Nalanda have closely examined the teaching of the Buddha, and so amongst them, one of them was Nagarjuna, who says that karma and delusion, the ending of karma or extinction of karma in delusion, with that there is liberation. And so when you check closely what is the cause of suffering, the cause of suffering is referred to as the origin of suffering. And so the origin here refers to what brings about the suffering. And so they are the karma, and these in turn are rooted in our mental afflictions, and the root of all mental afflictions is ignorance. And so, with regard to this ignorance, the 400 verses of Arya Devas, which is very sharp, says, just like the physical faculty permeates all other sensory faculties, such as those of the eye faculty, ear faculty, and so forth, whereas the eye faculty or the ear faculty do not permeate the other physical sensory faculties. So, just as the physical faculty permeates all other sensory faculties, all mental afflictions are permeated by this ignorance. So this total confusion is the root of all other mental afflictions or destructive emotions and thoughts. So, how do we get rid of this ignorance is by understanding dependent origination. So, Master Aryadeva says, by seeing dependent origination, this ignorance will not arise. We can eliminate it. So, therefore, by overcoming ignorance, all other mental afflictions can be overcome. And therefore, he says, dependent origination, the understanding or seeing it will overcome it. So here, this ignorance refers to that of grasping or clinging to some true independent existence in things. This will not go away merely by prayer. But you need to know the reality of things, which goes the wisdom of which goes against this ignorance. So the more you become familiar with this understanding of dependent origination, the less and less you will have this ignorance. The intensity of this ignorance will decrease. And so this is what is said in the 400 verses of Aryadeva. And Master Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka Karika, the middle way treatise, and there's 60 verses of reasoning, and then Aryadeva's 400 verses, and particularly the Madhyamaka Avatara, entering the middle way by Master Chandrakirti. So these are the texts which are very helpful in understanding the dependent origination and emptiness. So I have memorized, as it is the tradition in Tibet, I have also memorized Master Chandrakirti's middle way, entering the middle way, and also Abhisamaya Alamkara, the clear ornament of clear realization by Maitreya. And so since my childhood, I memorized these texts and others. And so sometimes I also read these texts and recite them. So we'll come across the text, have the occasion to go through the text, entering the middle way. So Master Nagarjuna shows how true cessation can be attained by showing the possibility of overcoming the ignorance, which is the root of all suffering, whether it can be dispelled or eliminated from our mind stream. And then, once you understand that cessation is possible, you also should know that it is possible through the practice of the path. And so, the path includes those of the practice of morality, so which is to refrain from those of the negative actions of body, speech, and mind. And then, having established yourself in morality, you go on to that of the concentration, single-pointed mind. So at this stage, of course, our mind is very unstable, getting distracted everywhere. And so in order to overcome that, we need single-pointed concentration. So with regard to the practice of morality and the concentration, these two trainings, as it's called, are shared with the non-Buddhist traditions as well. And then with regard to the wisdom, the third aspect of practice, there are many different types of wisdom. Wisdom pertaining to the common subjects, such as the 5 sciences of learning and so forth. So what we need to develop is the wisdom which understands whether these mental afflictions are valid cognitions or not, whether they are positive states of mind or not, and so forth. And then we need to apply the teaching within ourselves to progress along the path. So Buddhism has its own unique characteristics, whereas in the Pali tradition, the emphasis is given to scriptures, whereas in the Sanskrit tradition, the logic and reasoning is emphasized. It is mentioned in this book also that we are going to go through. O monks and scholars, just as gold is tested by rubbing, cutting, by burning, cutting, and rubbing, likewise you should examine my teaching and accept it, not because you have faith or devotion in me. So the Buddha says that his followers should not just follow his teaching because they have faith in him. Merely on the basis of faith, they should not believe or follow him. But just like checking the purity of gold by rubbing, cutting, and burning, cutting, and rubbing, thoroughly examine my teaching and then accept it. So having done the, having checked, like checking the gold, the purity of gold, with regard to the teaching, how do you examine it? Check it is by checking whether the teachings go against things which are obvious to our sensory perceptions or not, whether it goes against also those of the slightly hidden or obscure teaching meanings, which can be proved through evidence-based logic, and then also through the logic of scriptures. Based on the belief, so which in turn has to be based on the second aspect of the examination, examining the teaching of the Buddha. So when the teachings go against these 3 processes of checking their very truth, then we cannot accept. So having come into exile, I have had the opportunity to meet with many different scholars and also religious people. So in this century of science, the scientists would not take much interest in the mere belief systems which do not use much reasoning and logic, but they do take interest in the presentations of psychology, mind and emotions through logic and reasoning. And therefore, of course, the scientists do explain in great detail about that of psychology. But today, contemporary, the modern scientists do not have much information on mind and emotions or psychology, but they take special interest in learning from Buddhist psychology. So I know scientists who are expert and well-known, renowned scientists. They do take interest in learning from Buddhist psychology. So I say that Buddhism and the science, modern science, which also deal with reality of things, can go together hand in hand. So it is very important how the Nalanda tradition goes about with the teaching of the Buddha through logic and reasoning, which is very important. So you, the Chinese Buddhists, are follower of the same Nalanda tradition that we follow. So Xuanzang, who spread the Buddhism initially in China, he also had been to Nalanda and studied there in those old times. And at that time, so after studying in Nalanda, when he returned to China through the sea, the ocean, I have also been to that spot where he had been, and I was shown a hill, and it was said that there is a cave which is and so I had been to a cave where it was told me that Master Nagarjuna had meditated there, and when I was under the rock, people have told me that there was a white colored snake on the rock as well. And then the Indians at that time told me that the Xuanzang also passed through that route. And at some point in that route, I saw a conch on a kind of a wall that was built along a kind of a river there. I think His Holiness is referring to his visit to Chhattisgarh, Raipur, or somewhere there. And he wishes to, His Holiness wants to show the conch that he found. So the attendant seems not to recognize which conch His Holiness is referring to. His Holiness says that. So on the bank of that river, there was this conch, and nobody was around the conch. So if there was somebody sitting there or around that place, I would have to ask to give this conch to me. But since there was nobody there, then I thought it's something auspicious. And I made my prayer and put it into my shirt pocket. So, my Chinese Dharma friends, you are follower of the practitioners of the Buddhism, and particularly the Nalanda tradition, and in specifically following Longsu Phosa, Master Nagarjuna. Everybody has heard his name, and his Madhyamaka Karika had already been translated into your language, Chinese, before it was translated into Tibetan. And so we have connection since old times. And so today I'm teaching the essence of true eloquence. So this is the conch. So this is the conch I found. So I considered it some auspicious sign to find it. So as I said before, earlier, that I have memorized Madhyamaka Avatara, the entering into the middle way, and I also read the auto-commentary, Madhyamaka Avatara Bhashya, which is always on my table. So I also consider myself as a follower of Master Nagarjuna and Chandrakirti, not only just a follower, but I do reflect on emptiness several times in a day, often in the day. So I will go through the text, the Madhyamaka, Master Tsongkapa's text, the essence of true eloquence. In Tibet, in the 7th century first, during Songtsen Gampo's time, there was a special family relation with the Tang Emperor of Tang dynasty, and whose princess was became the wife of Songtsen Gampo. So at that time, so for me, for my ordination, first as an upasaka, taking upasaka, the layperson's vows or precepts, and then the renunciant vows, and then finally the fully ordained monk's ordination. All these were done in front of the Zhou statue, which was brought to Tibet from China at that time, when the Chinese princess was given, became the wife of the Songtsen Gampo. And so this is the main statue in the Lhasa Chokang temple, the main representation of the Buddha. in the 7th century. And then in the 8th century, so I sometimes jokingly tell it, half jokingly, half truth. So since this statue was brought to Tibet from China, and this also may have been the introduction to Buddhism from China to Tibet, and Chinese princess becoming Songtsen Gampo's wife. So at that time, it seems Songtsen Gampo found Chinese letters or characters very complicated. Though the Buddhism came to Tibet from China in the beginning, he thought of devising our own script based on the Indian letters, which are those of the of Sanskrit. And so, accordingly, the Tibetan script was devised or invented. So, having married a Chinese princess and also enjoyed he must have enjoyed Chinese food and Chinese art and dance and songs and so forth. But with regard to the letter, he found the Chinese characters very complicated and therefore devised our own new script. And then in the 8th century, Trisong Detsen, the then Tibetan emperor, invited Master Chandrakirti, who was one of the topmost scholars of Nalanda. So he was invited to Tibet, and since he was in Tibet, he also advised the Tibetans, since you have your own writing system, without having to rely on Pali or Sanskrit in the future, in the future, for your study of the Dharma, you should translate these teachings from Sanskrit or Pali into your own language. And so that was how the translation projects was carried out. And it is even some historians say that the Chandrakirti even took interest in learning Tibetan himself. And so we have today over 100 volumes of Kanjur and over 220 volumes of Tenjur. The Kanjur refers to the translation of the words of the Buddha, and the Tenjur, those of the exegetical treatises by Indian masters. So in these translations, the original languages were Sanskrit, Pali, and perhaps also Nepalese. And so all of us follow this tradition, the Nalanda tradition, and we are Dharma brothers and sisters following this tradition. And today, in the 21st century, people are losing their interest in religion. But in the Buddhist countries, and particularly even in Chinese mainland China, it seems the number of people taking interest in Buddhism is increasing. So in any way, what is taught in Buddhism is something which even scholars of modern subjects, and particularly science, and quantum physicists. So it is its own, quantum physics has its own philosophy, philosophical concepts. So when I have discussions with quantum physicists, I know one Indian master, Raja Ramana,
Rajaramana, and a kong Genga Lum
who told me
Nucho Nala, Rigne Savage race.
this quantum physics is something new in the West, but in India, the concept has already been discovered over 2,500 years ago. And he even recited few lines from Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna. So what quantum physics says is that there is disparity between appearance and the reality. So how things appear to us is as if they have some objective existence. Though that is the appearance, since things are made up of subtle particles, the infinitesimal particles and so forth, they do not exist in that way. And therefore, just as Raja Ramana has said, had told me, in India, Master Nagarjuna or the Chittamatra masters, it is mentioned clearly that things do not exist the way they appear to us. So quantum physics, of course, does not talk about using this understanding of how the disparity between the appearance and reality to overcome our negative emotions. But we do use this understanding for that purpose. And in Lantu University, I've heard that there are some people who have said, some quantum physicists who have said that having gained conviction in this idea of non-objective existence in things, which quantum physics teaches, their reaction to instances which are good or bad is not as intense as it is for others. And so there's some of the students of quantum physics have even and said that in Lantu University in China. So the Madhyamaka understanding or explanation that things have no essential existence in and of themselves is quite similar, or the quantum physics idea of quantum physics is also very close to this. So you, the follower of Tenzin Gyamchen, you disciples of the late Tenzin Gyamchen La, you also have connection with mainland China. So in Lantu University, I have heard that there are students of quantum physics who have said what I've said earlier. So when you go to mainland China, since you have also Dharma centers there, you could also inquire about these scientists. So today, in mainland China, it is said that there are over 400 million Buddhists. Historically, China was a Buddhist country, and in 1954-55, I have been to China. So I've been to Xinjiang and so forth. So there were many Buddhist temples in China. So it shows clearly that Buddhism has prevailed in China in those times. And so today, China has the biggest population in the world, and it is also a country with a long history. And Buddhism has already been established in China for a long time now. And therefore, we are not talking about propagating the teaching of the Buddhism as such, but we are talking about how we could teach people in mainland China, where you have your Dharma Center, as an academic subject.
다쇼 가래. 가서.
Tsinghua.
칭화 다쇼.
In Tsinghua University in Beijing, I knew a professor from there who told me that
그 민트 가서. 가. 가다 칭화.
so the professor Chu Su Lung, whom I know, told me that when the times have changed, he requested me to visit Tsinghua University not as the Dalai Lama, but as a professor. So I have also accepted his invitation. So I also have some view, new idea that the Nobel Peace Prize laureates, so if we could have, if they could convene a meeting or conference of Nobel Peace Prize laureates, or Peace Prize laureates, which I have also received, without talking about touching any politics. And politically speaking, I do not seek independence of Tibet. And therefore, some Tibetans also criticize me for not seeking independence. So what I'm saying is Tibet, which is considered a minority region, and also the southern Mongolia and Xinjiang. What I say is that if we could think through to stay within the People's Republic of China, it would be good. And so, in this connection, the students and followers of Tenzin Chamchen La, the late Tenzin Chamchen La, you have opportunity to visit China proper, and therefore, since this contact between the people in Taiwan and also the People's Republic of China is increasing, so by tradition, Buddhism is also your own traditional religion. And so if you could not only focus on economy, but focus on your cultural tradition, the complete Chinese cultural tradition is still extant in Taiwan. And it has declined so much in China proper, mainland China. And therefore, you should think of, since the population of Buddhists is increasing in the People's Republic of China, you could maybe give your service through the culture and tradition. And China, PRC is also following, is said to be a socialist country. I am also a socialist. So if you think of the majority of the people, you really follow this socialist principle. If you think about your own self alone, then yourself alone, you are not following the socialist idea. And so, Master Shantideva says, whatever happiness there is in the world all come from thinking wishing others to have happiness. Whatever suffering there is in the world all come from wishing happiness for oneself alone. And then he goes on to say that If you are not able to switch your own joy and happiness with the suffering of others, leave alone Buddhahood, attaining Buddhahood. Even in this cycle of existence, you will not have happiness. And therefore, he says, when you have the bodhicitta, which is like riding a horse, which leads you from bliss to bliss, which intelligent person would despair or feel discouraged to ride this horse. And so with regard to emptiness, also, Master Nagarjuna says, whatever is dependently arisen is said to be empty. That is also said to be the designated, and that is the middle way. And since there is no phenomenon which is not dependent, there is no phenomenon which is not empty. And so these may have been some remarks on the side remarks. And so I have today the opportunity to have this Dharma discourse for you. So what we have to think is China, which has the greatest population of the follower of the Dharma, the Master Nagarjuna's tradition, we need to think of us bringing this message of the teaching of the Buddha to the followers of the Buddha and Master Nagarjuna in the PRC. So Chandrakirti established the Nalanda tradition in Tibet. And therefore, we have the masters like Longchen Rabjampa in the Nyingma tradition, and also masters of the Kagyu, Sakya, and Geluk traditions, all of which has paid special attention to Master Nagarjuna's teachings. And later on came Master Tsongkapa with regard to the middle way philosophical assertions or view. When Master Tsongkapa had some doubts, and then he thought of visiting India, because there was some Indian master at that time whom he wanted to meet and discuss. And so Master Nagarjuna was stopped from going to India by Manjushri, because he would have obstacles to his life. And therefore, Master Tsongkapa remained in Tibet and studied all the major the texts on middle way philosophy, and particularly the writings of Master Nagarjuna and his followers. And so if you read his own writings, Master Nagarjuna's, Master Tsongkapa's text, you'll find his life to be such as it is mentioned in the Gaden Hagyama prayer. In this degenerate age, he became a greatly learned, extensively learned person, and also applied the teachings in his practice by going into hermitage. So he relied on a very meager food with Tibetan barley flour, roasted barley flour, and tea mainly, as he went into retreat with his 8 main disciples. And then he gained insight into the middle way view. So then he wrote these 5 major texts on Madhyamaka, the commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika, his commentary on Madhyamaka Avatara, and then the section on insight, the special insight in the great treatise of the stages of the path of enlightenment, and then the intermediate treatise on the middle way, and then this text, which is the differentiation between the definitive and the interpretable meaning of the sutras. I will only give brief explanation of the text. We do not have that much time to go into the whole text. I received this transmission on this text from my late teacher, Yongzin Ling Rinpoche, who received it from Jone Lama Rinpoche. Jone Lama Rinpoche, Lobsang Gyatso, I think. And so in the central part of Tibet, it didn't seem to exist. This transmission didn't seem to exist before that. And so Yongzin Ling Rinpoche used to say that Drashikil Monastery is like the treasury of transmissions. So with regard to questions and answers, you have already prepared questions. You do not have to do that. So, as I said before, I have memorized Madhyamaka, and I also, as I said before, I do read this text, and it's so you can ask questions directly. We do not have to have prepared questions. Then if I do not know the answer, I'll say I don't know, without any hesitation. So when I was in London one time, I attended a meeting, and there was a break in between. And during that tea break, one English gentleman came to me and said, it's very good that you say, I don't know. So if I don't know the answer to your questions, I will say, Bhutito, I don't know. So please ask, if you have questions, please ask directly. So in the translations of Indian texts, there's always some salutation to a deity or Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and so forth. So here, the salutation in the beginning of the text is done to Manju Ghosha, Guru Manju Ghosha, reverence to Guru Manju Ghosha, which shows the authenticity of the teaching, that this is not concocted by Tibetans. And these verses of salutation, Shambhu, Megavan, Hiranyagarbha, Anangagarbha, Damodara, and other gods, all puffed up with self-infatuation. They roar their lords over the worlds, and yet, before the vision of this body, they pale like fireflies in the sun. Then down they bow their sparkling diadems in reverence to the lotuses at its feet. I pay homage to the Lord of Sages, the God beyond the gods. And then the next is the salutation of Maitreya and Manju Ghosha. And then next verse is salutation to Nagarjuna, Asanga, and so forth. So in India, there were 4 different schools of philosophy within Buddhism, and particularly those of the Madhyamaka and Chittamatra, the mind-only school and the middle way school. And so the next verse pays homage to Nagarjuna and Asanga, who pioneered the ways for champions of philosophy with two interpretations of Sugata's sacred discourse. So with regard to the selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena, with regard to the latter, the Chittamatras, there's Chittamatra interpretation or explanation of the selflessness of phenomena, which is also referring to emptiness and the Madhyamaka philosophical idea of emptiness, and made that superb doctrine of that victor shine like sunlight throughout the triple world. Respectfully, I bow to those master scholars, best heralds of non-decline of Buddha's teaching, who upheld the two systems of champions and opened the eyes of millions of geniuses to the ornaments of the holy land of India, Aryadeva, brave Buddha Palita, Bhaviveka, Chandrakirti. And so Master Nagarjuna and his main disciple, chief disciple Aryadeva, and also there was this other master named Aryashura. And then Buddha Palita, whose main text is the Buddha Palita commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and Bhaviveka, who was a follower of Savatantrika Madhyamaka, the autonomous school of middle way philosophy, who rejected the mere nominality of things. As Master Chandrakirti mentions at the end of Master his own writing, Madhyamaka Avatara, the entering the middle way. So in verse number 55 of the final chapter, he mentions, this suchness just explained is most profound and terrifying, yet people with past habituation will certainly realize it. Others, however, despite vast learning, will fail to comprehend. So amongst those who have the great vast learning but fail to comprehend this is included Master Bhaviveka and Vasubandhu, and Dignaga, and so forth. And then Master Bhaviveka also, in one of his writings, which is a commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Avatara, has mentioned that Master Asanga and Vasubandhu and so forth are shameless, not understanding the understanding the view of Master Nagarjuna. So in the past in Tibet, we have this prayer to what are known as the 6 ornaments and 2 sublime masters. So the 6 ornaments didn't include Master Chandrakirti, Bhaviveka, Shantideva, and others. And therefore, I wrote this supplication to 17 Nalanda masters. So at the end of Master Nagarjuna's Ratnavali, he mentions that we should recite these 20 verses 3 times in a day. And so these verses towards the end, the last 3 verses are very profound for me. And then, so my practice, I consider the writings of Master Chandrakirti and Mullah Madhyamaka Karika also as my main text for practice. And also Chandrakirti, Vasubandhu, Thirumadhi, Dignagan, Dharmakirti. There have been many who did not realize the point, although they strive, were not lowly in accomplishments from direct experience and were learned in the doctrine, even dedicated themselves to the path of philosophy. But I have seen it quite precisely by the grace of Guru Sevya Manju Ghosha, and I am going to explain it from great love. You who aspire to peerless philosophy, listen with reverence, with the critical discrimination or discernment that realizes the deadness of the teaching. And so, the question of Rashtrapala scripture says, the way is empty, peaceful, uncreated, not knowing that the living beings wonder, moved by compassion. He introduces them with hundreds of reasons and techniques. So having seen the extremely difficult to realize the actuality of things and so forth, so when you study Madhyamaka philosophy, it is not for some kind of a scholarship and alone, but to actually be able to use your knowledge of Madhyamaka view to crush your destructive emotions. So what we refer to as the five-tiered path has to be developed within ourselves. The five paths referring to the path of accumulation, the paths of accumulation, preparation or application, seeing, meditation, and then the normal learning. So we need to make transformation within ourselves in order to be able to progress along these paths, from the path of accumulation to the path of preparation and so forth, and through to the Buddhahood. So thus the discriminating should exert themselves in the techniques of realizing thatness. This depends on the discrimination between the interpretable meaning and the definitive meaning of the teachings of the victor. So it is not possible to discriminate between these two on the scriptural authority alone. So because amongst the disciples of the Buddha there are those with different mental dispositions, and on some statements such as this is interpretable meaning, this is definitive meaning, otherwise the champion's elaboration of an explanation of the problem of discrimination between the interpretable and the definitive would have been pointless. So it is, as it is said in the beginning, that the Buddha himself has said, monks and scholars and so forth. So otherwise the champion's elaboration of the explanation of the problem of discrimination between the interpretable and definitive would have been pointless. Further, many different interpretations of interpretable and definitive have been declared in the scriptures themselves. Finally, since it cannot be established in general by deferring to the scriptures statement alone, as no such statement would be valid in every case, neither can it be established by a mere scriptural statement in any particular case. The champions of philosophy, these trailblazers, foretold to discern the interpretable and definitive in the teachings, elucidated their inner meaning. Hence, we must seek that meaning by following the discrimination established by reasoning that false alternative interpretations of definitive meaning scriptures, proving that definitive and uninterpretable meaning. Thus, ultimately, we must discriminate with impeccable reasoning. Should we accept theories violating reason, their teachers could not be, the proponents cannot be become the personification of valid cognition, or they cannot be authoritative. For even the ultimate reality of things includes means of proof through original, logically established reasoning. And then it says, seeing the ramification of this, the Lord declared, O bhikshus, just as goldsmith gets his test his gold by melting, cutting, and rubbing, likewise you should examine my teaching thoroughly and accept it not because you have devotion to me. So I have also read the scriptures which are referred to as making the distinction between the interpretable and those of the definitive meanings of the sutras. So there are two systems discriminating between what is interpretable and what is definitive. Those that follow the sutra elucidating the intention, and then those that distinguish based between these two based on Akshayamati Sutra. So with regard to the first, it says Paramatma's Samudgata states in the elucidation of intentions, or usually translated as unraveling the thought. The Lord proclaims in many discourses an intrinsic identity of aggregates, their characteristics of production and destruction, their abandonment and full understanding. As with the aggregates, so does he proclaim the 12 media, the dependent origination, and 4 foods. Thus does he proclaim the intrinsic identity, the thorough knowledge, the abandonment, the realization, the meditation of the 4 holy noble truths, the intrinsic identity, variety, plurality, abandonment, and full understanding of the elements, and the intrinsic identities, resistances, remedies, initial productions, and maintenance, and so forth. So in the scriptures, there are mentions of 2 different things. One is that things like our eye faculty and form and so forth do exist the way they appear to us. And on the other hand, other scriptures saying that they do not exist the way they appear to us, but they have no essential existence or nature in and of themselves. So there are verbal contradictions within the statements in some scriptures that all things are devoid of intrinsic reality, and those of others that proclaim the intrinsic identity and so on, and of the aggregates and so on. And so here the Paramattha Samudgata has actually asked the Buddha why he taught these different teachings. So now we will stop.
For your Holiness teaching, and here are some students' questions.
请第一位开始发问。
首先，弟子以圣义3门至诚恭敬顶礼具恩根本。
How are mental karmic imprints left on the mere I, that is merely designated on the basis of the aggregates? How does the mere I pass into the next life?
首先，第一个问题来自于子梦师陆士林。不许阿赖耶识者其习气的见地，以住相体性最难了解。不依运体安立之为我之上，习气如何安立？为我，他以来世怎么投生的？请慈悲开始。
主我淡薄呢，我藏个点度把车着数的，我藏得给我起码着数你看伊。
So first of all, with regard to this I, in the context of mere I, we do talk about my body, my speech, my mind, and something, kind of an agent which rules over my body, my speech, and my mind. And so we talk about this I, but where is that I? You cannot find it. And with regard to my body, when you say my body, the body itself has its own constituent parts. My body's parts, which are the head, the hands, and the fingers, and so forth. When you try to check closely, the body itself also, you cannot find it. And therefore, Master Chandrakirti says, through the sevenfold reasoning that you use to check a chariot, you cannot find what the chariot is, finally. So likewise, a person is designated on the basis of his parts, but a person does exist in another way, which is to say, conventionally. And then so when you check how a person or things exist through the reasonings, which are the fivefold analysis, the sevenfold analysis of chariot, and so forth, you will not be able to find anything, as Master Chandrakirti says. So in verses, I think, verses 34, 35 of the 36 of the sixth chapter of Madhyamaka Avatara, we find mentioned that things cannot have any intrinsic existence in and of themselves, because there would be logical absurdities that you would have to follow. And therefore, Master Chandrakirti says, so in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras also, it's said that things are merely designated, merely nominal. And Heart Sutra also says the five aggregates have to be seen as merely are empty of any intrinsic existence. The five aggregates also. So in Chinese translation of the Heart Sutra, I have heard that the word also or even is not there. So it seems it has to be added. In the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma, during the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha doesn't go through he talks about the selflessness of a person, but in the second turning of the wheel, he even goes into the selflessness of the aggregates, the five aggregates. And so these five aggregates, on the basis of which we designate a person or a being, and therefore since the aggregates themselves cannot have any intrinsic existence. The person which is designated on the basis of them cannot also have any intrinsic existence. And in the Madhyamaka Avatara also, where it mentions about the bodhisattvas even outshining the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddha Arya beings and those of the Arhats through intelligence. Mentions about how we cannot have the full understanding or insight into the selflessness of a person without realizing the selflessness of phenomena or the aggregates. And then, of course, we talk about the imprints left on the mind. Of course, the imprints have to be left on the mind stream, this continuation of the mind, and not on the body. And so, if you try to analyze where the I is and try to find it within the body and the mind, you cannot find anything as being the person as such. So all the good and bad imprints that we create are left on the mind, and the body, we have this body and this life, and it will be left behind, and so we change bodies, but this stream or the continuation of the mind goes on, and therefore on the imprints, we can talk about the imprints left on the mere eye. And talking about, with regard to the question about how this mere eye passes to the next life, we have to think on the about this on the basis of the mind's continuation. So the body can change. You can, in one life, you can have a body of a human being. In another life, you can have a body of an animal and others. And so, mainly on the basis of this continuity of the mind stream, you can talk about past and future lives. So with regard to the consciousness, there are different degrees of subtlety. There are those of the sensory consciousnesses, and then the mental consciousness. And within the mental, there are those of the waking state consciousness, deep sleep consciousness at the deep sleep time, and then those of the consciousness at the dreaming time. And these differentiations of degrees of subtlety are given in the tantric texts. So the luminous or the clear light and awareness nature of the mind mainly has its source in the subtlemost mind. So when we fall asleep, the sensory perceptions stop working, whereas this mental consciousness is still there. And then when we faint, there is also a subtle consciousness still there. And then in Tantra, it is explained how the grosser states of consciousness dissolve into the subtler ones. And so there are mentions of 80 different conceptions, so-called conceptions. And so the 80 conceptions dissolve into the whitish appearance, they dissolve into the reddish increase, and then these also dissolve into the near attainment. So when we stop breathing, the heartbeat also stops, and so the consciousness working in the mind or the brain stops. When the blood flow stops, the working of consciousness in the brain also stops. So in Taiwan also, there has been cases when somebody is clinically dead and a doctor checks the body and finds that the person has already died, which means that the flow of blood into the brain has ceased. And then my late teacher, Yongzhen Ling Rinpoche, also stayed in a state of meditative state for 13 days. And the late Geshe Jampa Gyatso, who died in Taiwan recently, stayed for about 28 days or something in that meditative state. And so these cannot be explained from science. Modern science cannot explain this phenomena, whereas we can explain it on the basis of this subtlemost mind. So after the three visions of the whitish appearance and so forth have stopped, we also talk about the chakras, the 5 different chakras at the crown, throat, heart, navel, and the sacred place. And so all these different consciousnesses dissolve from these points into the heart point. And then we experience the 3 visions of whitish appearance, the reddish increase, and the blackish near attainment. And all these grosser consciousnesses dissolve into this final, subtlemost mind, which is called the innate clear light, or the luminous mind. And then this clear light mind goes from this life into the next and continues on until we become a Buddha. And so so this subtle mind is referred to as the Buddha nature as well. And so I reflect on, when I do the Deity Yoga practices, I also reflect on these lines from Mahayana Uttara Tantra, which says the Buddha's body radiates everywhere, and that it is the nature of emptiness of the Buddha's mind and the sentient being's mind is undifferentiated. And then, because the sentient beings have this gotra or lineage or potential, the sentient beings have the Buddha nature. And so I think along these lines, when I do the dissolution process. He represented someone from the Losaling Buddhist Center and asked this question.
请问尊者，在观修空性时
Yes.
The second question, please.
好，请问尊者，在观修空性时，
How should we meditate on the lack of intrinsic existence of both the object and subjective mind as and when we experience intense attachment and anger?
空个之话的，让给东一公北处的，挪的原面几大的大个。
Yeah.
东尼可啥？
The question, they switched the sequence. The question is not this previous one, but it is how do we check whether our meditation on emptiness is correct or not?
这다 우먼 죽보다 싸워시로 zukol이야. 이나 안다 될 한도 세면은
So in Madhyamaka Karika and Madhyamaka Avatara, and also Master Tsongkapa's special insight section of Lamrim Chemo, we have all these texts, but the most effective teaching on emptiness for me is Master Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Avatara, and particularly these verses that are those verses that I have recited earlier. Chapter 6, verse number 34, 35, 36. So having studied Madhyamaka philosophy, when you check how things appear to you, they appear as if they have some intrinsic objective existence in and of themselves. So when you meditate, first have this understanding of emptiness, and then when you do meditation, finally, you should be able to remain in this sky-like emptiness, meditation on the sky-like emptiness, which is to say that you will be able to have the experience of how things have no objective existence, that there is some kind of a sense of vacuity, emptiness. Nothing really exists in and of themselves. But having done this space like emptiness, meditation on it, then when you come out of the meditation, in the post-meditation session, you have to see everything like those of illusion. And so these are the two ways of meditating on emptiness. So why does Tsongkapa consider the valid cognition of conventionalities important when meditating on emptiness? So why does Tsongkapa consider the conventional valid cognition important when meditating emptiness? So when you actually are in the meditation on emptiness, all these diverse appearances will dissolve, will not be there. But what is the meaning of emptiness? As Rinpoche says in his praise to the Buddha for teaching dependent origination, which is also what Master Nagarjuna says, whatever is dependently arisen is said to be empty. So it doesn't mean, emptiness doesn't mean nothingness, but when you check how things exist, you will not be able to find anything that you can point your finger at as being this or that. So when you are in meditation on emptiness, your mind is settled on this space-like emptiness. Whereas when you come out of that meditation and you see things functioning, causality and so forth functioning, then you'll be able to remind yourself of the experience you have had in the meditation session, that things have no objective existence, yet things do appear to you, and therefore they are like illusion. So, Rinpoche says, appearance No, the dependent origination appearing as emptiness, and emptiness dawning as dependent origination. And so it doesn't mean dependent origination does not exist, but they exist, but without any intrinsic objective existence. Whereas though they have no objective existence, yet they do appear, they do exist, and therefore you understand that things do exist. And so the question, regarding the question, when you think that things are empty and think, you may come to think that things do not exist even in convention. And therefore, in order to dispel that ignorance, that misunderstanding, you should have the understanding of how things exist conventionally through dependence, and bring this to understanding together.
跟您说声早起得嘞，欢迎你早日来到台湾。好，尊敬的尊者，现在有个问题想要请教您。目前地球暖化的现象日益严重，不少的地方呢，是有火灾、水灾、地震、疫情或者是饥荒。感觉起来呢，地球居住的条件越来越差。
How should we meditate on the lack of intrinsic existence? Is that the question? Of both the object and subjective mind, as and when we experience. No. Question number 5. Today we face various natural calamities of the earth, water, fire, and wind due to global warming. How should we face such threats? So first of all, what we can do something about is to protect our environment. This is relevant. And then, of course, this whole trichilocosm, the 3,000 world systems, also evolved through the process of evolution. And then, in the end, this whole universe will also disappear. So we go through the cycle of first formation, and then abiding, and then destruction, and finally an empty state, empty era. So this is how the universe goes through this cycle. So this world has existed for about 5 billion years. And then we have global warming today. So as said in the Abhidharmakosha Karika, it seems we are in the era of fire, destruction of the world through fire. So therefore we see this global warming increasing. So some ecologists or environmentalists have said, whom I know, have said that in the next several decades, the world will turn into a desert. So this is not talking from religion's point of view, but scientific point of view. And so we seem to be in the era of destruction. We're going through the process of destruction through fire. So when this world is destroyed through fire or other elements, we would be still in other world systems. And because of our spiritual merits and so forth, we may be also reborn in Sukhavati and other pure realms. But we need to determine ourselves to work for the benefit of sentient beings, as it is said in the prayer, as long as space endures, as long as sentient beings remain, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of transmigrators. So this courage and determination is very important for us. So this world so we cannot do much about the natural process of the so this world in the end, of course, will be destroyed and disappear, and there will be an empty space era. So we would have to say goodbye in the end to the world as well. So we are talking about past and future lives. So we cannot talk about when we began. There is no beginning to our life. And we talk about the 3,000 world systems, the 3,000 great world systems, and so. So the world system is said to be calculated in terms of this incalculable Rabjam Gyatso Gyu. That is the word that the term used. And so, to the best of our ability, what we must do is to meditate and cultivate love, compassion, bodhicitta, and the understanding and insight into emptiness. So if we are able to do these practices, you'll be able to have a good life in the future and help yourself in the future as well, and also help others. So from the method or the skillful means side, you need to practice bodhicitta, and on the wisdom side, you need to practice the wisdom of emptiness. So when you say mantras or the prayers, first, prepare yourself, your mind, with bodhicitta and the wisdom view of emptiness in the beginning. So this will be make a true practice of your dharma, and then it'll help in the future lives, and you'll be able to progress along the path and help others as well.
一切众生的众苦、逼迫的根源，皆来自于业跟烦恼。那烦恼又来自于无始无明，故对于进食的好坏，一生强大的这个贪嗔。此时该如何串习跟修学？性与寂静当中呢，皆是无有自性。同时，又该如何善巧的将伪言转为菩提道的作用？恭请尊者开始。
谢谢。
So how should we meditate on the lack of intrinsic existence of both object and subjective mind, and as and when we experience intense attachment and anger? So when you are intensely overcome with attachment or anger, you will not be able to think about emptiness at all. So what you can do is being unbiased, remain unbiased, relaxed, in a relaxed state of mind. Then you should do your best to reflect on emptiness. So this will help to reduce your attachment and anger. So otherwise, when you have intense experience of attachment and anger, it will not help. And so when you are in your normal state of mind, relaxed, and then you reflect on bodhicitta and the view of emptiness, this will help to reduce your anger and attachment. Otherwise, when they are intense, so maybe it's not there in reality, but so when you have a very strong attachment and anger, and you are told to meditate on emptiness, you may say, keep quiet to the other person. So in a gradual process, you should be able to reduce your attachment and anger through the meditation on emptiness and bodhicitta when you are in a normal state of mind. So that's
谢尊者，我想请问尊者一个问题。广论在念死这个科判里头，宗大师说了，广论就念死，事实上是初中后都重要，要弟子们对于这个科判，应该要常时说修习。那么我对于所谓的后重要，这里头所谓的后，到底是什么意？是指什么阶段？那么后重要到底应该怎么解释？麻烦尊者可以替我解惑一下。
空给之外的呢，结党一千别讲究南林千莫囊呢。
So in the great treatise on the Path to Enlightenment, Rinpoche has mentioned that the impermanence, meditation on the impermanence and death is very important in all throughout the practice of Lamrim. So what does the how is it important at the end, and what is meant by end here? So when you train your mind, in the training of your mind, so there are stages, first, second, and third phases, and so forth. So for the beginner level, so many of the problems we face are because of holding on to some kind of a permanence in our life. So for that, when you think, eventually I will not be there, and so this will help to loosen the grasping at the permanence. So here you are thinking about the fact that there is no certainty when you are going to die. To counter this clinging to permanence of life. So while thinking the uncertainty of your death, if you just give up eating, thinking that I'll die anyway, I mean, that's foolish. Whereas the meditation on emptiness here has to help you not to be tossed by love and hate towards your near and dear ones and enemies. And so you need to reflect on the fact that because of holding on to some permanence in your life, you indulge in so many different things, unnecessary things which are meaningless, but that you're not thinking that you're going to die tonight or anything like that. So you should think, of course, in any way you are going to die, but the certainty, the time when you are going to die is not uncertain, and then that you need to think about how that any other thing cannot help when at the time of death.
Thanks for your Holiness teaching. We have no more questions for today. Thank you again. Is there anything else you want to share with us?
As I already said earlier, in this world, Because of destructive emotions, how people are creating so much problem and difficulties in the world today. So all of us, from the top leaders down to the lowest of the people in the simplest of the people in society, we do not want suffering but want happiness, yet we cause lots of suffering to ourselves and others because of our desirous attachment and anger. And we are not concerned how to bring about happiness within ourselves from within. Rather, we distract ourselves or try to find happiness from things external. And therefore, we are ignorant about what actually brings about happiness. And therefore, I usually talk about cultivating emotional hygiene. Whereas in terms of physical hygiene and health, we do a lot. So because of our human intelligence, with which we can discern a lot of things, even thinking about the planning for future and so forth. And accordingly, we are tossed by love towards our near and dear ones, hatred towards our enemies, and therefore we create a lot of problems. And so these problems are brought about by, on the one hand, this sense of permanence in oneself, and then also seeing absolute beauty in things beautiful and absolute ugliness in things which are unwanted. And so we need to understand the different degrees of subtlety within the mind and also the destructive emotions in order to counter these problems. And so, first think about impermanence, the grosser ones, and then go into the subtler impermanence. So this body and the mind that we have now, which are contaminated, and also this suffering, because of these contaminated aggregates, we have suffering. And then think of the selflessness in the coarser level, and then go into the subtle selflessness on the basis of the Chittamatra and then the Madhyamaka philosophy. So it is like going through the different stages in our school system. We begin from the lower schools classes and go up. So from class 1 to 2 to 3 and so forth. And so you need to lay the foundation like that. So we will come across these the next days. So the reason why Buddha taught selflessness in its different shades of the subtlety is to suit the mental dispositions of his disciples. And so these teachings were given to reduce our attachment and anger, decrease them. So why do we say we need to counter these destructive emotions through antidotes? Is to have happiness, which we want. Thank you. Bye-bye.
全场大众请起立，恭送法王。
大家
家可以向镜头向法王挥挥手，我们明天再见。
对。谢谢。